what if the epicness that we sometimes spend our entire lifetime searching for exists not in spite of the boulders, but thanks to the boulder version of you, that these boulders inspire you to become? Often, when we least expect it, life thrusts us into the role of the reluctant hero or hero in our own story. How we respond in those moments can be the difference between thriving or just surviving. We believe that our story will be determined by how we dare to answer one burning question: how to choose to live. Join us as we explore the mindset shifts, innovative strategies, and captivating stories from my own life experience and those of my truly epic guests. So let's get this started. Welcome to another episode of the How to Choose to Live podcast. And I am so excited to introduce you to my guest today. And you will see why when you read her full bio in the show notes. And I say the full bio in the show notes because this woman has achieved so much. She has been such a mover and shaker, as they say, that it would be impossible for me to tell you all about it right here, right now. But let me just give you a few little highlights. She is an accomplished in the leadership and leadership development space, a coach, a keynote speaker, seminar leader. She has been the senior consultant, the principal and sales executive for organizations like Franklin Covey, Tom Peters, Kaplan Inc. And she was consistently an award winner sales performer during that time. And of course, my personal favorite is that she is the author of this remarkable book called Instinctology. And that is really what we are here to talk about today, to really dive deeply. It's how really, what is this instinct thing that we all talk about, and how do we know when it's truly instinct, when we should be listening to it, and how do we turn it into one of our superpowers that really helps us learn how to choose to live? So without any further ado, let me introduce you to Miss Roben Graziadei. Woohoo! Yay! Welcome, Roben. I'm so glad to have you here.
Meridith, it's great to be here. It's just so much fun to be on your podcast and to be with you today. Thank you.
As you know, as you're watching this podcast, you know that we are all about those boulders that come typically uninvited into our life. So how do we get to the point in our life where we feel like we've truly lived in spite of, or wait a minute, what if it's not even in spite of? What if it's thanks to those boulders in our life? So, Roben, why don't you start us out by sharing, how did you first come to discover the power of this thing called instinct, and did it somehow relate to the boulder that maybe you experienced at some point in your life?
It really did, Meredith. And that is actually why I'm so passionate about helping other people learn to listen to their inner wisdom, your intuitive nudges. Some people call it a still small voice, and learn to trust it and act on it. Because, yes, trusting my intuition over time, which has become, I've become better and better at it over time. It takes a while to develop your intuitive intelligence muscle. And my passion is to help people do that so that they also can have victory over circumstances they've been through, trauma that they've been through, just and lead really your acronym an epic life, both
Yes.
personally and professionally. So my own story is that, like very many people on the planet, I did grow up in what I would say was a dysfunctional home. My parents fought a lot. There was a lot of violence. There are some events that happened to me in my youth that I do not want to disclose here because they're really very ugly. And at a very early age, I think I was around 10 or 11 or 12 years old, I started praying for wisdom
Mhm.
to try to figure out how to navigate the waters of some of the turbulence in my growing up years. And so over time, I really started listening to that still small voice inside, listening to that intuition and trusting it and acting on it instead of always listening to other people's voices and what they were
Mhm.
trying to tell me to do, or my own internal critic that was putting me down and telling me what to do and what not to do. So it has come from the power of trusting my intuition that I was able to overcome some adverse situations that I experienced in my youth and really become a person that was able to serve and help a lot of people through my career. I don't consider my success to be the accolades and the statistics that people quote and the credentials that I have. That's not what I consider my success to be. I consider my success to be being able to overcome extreme adverse circumstances from my youth and then be a voice to help other people do the same. And that's what my career has been. I think about two of my growing up years, my dad was a real advocate for my intuition. He would
Mm.
say to me, your common sense is going to save you, Roben. And he'd call me into business situations he was in, and he'd say, I want to hear your thoughts because your intuition's impeccable. He was a pilot for TWA, and he taught me to fly when I was around the age of 16. And I'll never forget the time that he asked me to close my eyes. He was there, so it was safe. It was nothing
Mm.
unsafe or dangerous.
Yeah.
And he asked me to close my eyes and command the airplane just on my intuition. And
Mm.
so for, I don't know how long it was, it felt like an hour. It was probably only a minute, but
Yeah.
I did that. And he said to me, Roben, you have an intuitive feel for the airplane, just like you have an intuitive feel for business. And I was just a young girl. So I really am grateful to my dad being an advocate for me to grow and develop in that way. And so I want to pay it forward with others.
Yeah.
And I say our intuition is like this. You've heard the analogy before, if a pilot gets off course just a little bit, they will end up in the wrong destination. That's our intuition is our greatest internal GPS system.
Yes.
It helps us to stay on course, and it also helps us to correct our course if we start to veer off of it. So I like to help people first listen to their intuition to stay on course and also to correct their course. And I could give you story after story about that.
There's so many gems in what you've shared. I
Okay.
want to highlight some of them before we move into more actual
Mhm.
stories.
That's
And
perfect. Thank you.
so, one of the things that I think, if you're listening to this, that I want you to take note, especially if you've listened to some of the other episodes of this podcast, that I love that you're bringing up about your father. And it is the type of, you can call it positive reinforcement, or positive programming even.
Mhm.
And something that you really highlight is what we say in the present tense. Our
Mhm.
present tense statements, whether we hear them or, hint, hint, whether we get in the habit of repeating them over and over
Mhm.
to ourselves,
Mhm.
our subconscious deduces that this is fact.
Mhm.
This is truth.
Mhm.
So, because you had so few filters when you were young to be told over and over again how much great sense you have, how great common sense, and what great intuition
Mhm.
is, it allowed you to be open and to lean into
Mhm.
that. Interestingly enough, my experience as a young child was very different from that. Now, it wasn't my parents telling me I I didn't have common sense. It was two very specific experiences. One was actually when I was probably 13 or 14, and I loved ballet. I mean, this is what I just knew. That little voice in me said, "This is your passion. This is your
Mhm.
calling. This is what you are intended to do and to be in this
Mhm.
next chapter of your life going forward." So I poured heart and soul into this. And everyone around me was telling me how talented I was
Mhm.
until this one day when I was in a quote unquote audition with my beloved ballet teacher who had nurtured my love of ballet. And to pretty much everyone in the room, including myself, this audition seemed like it was just kind of a formality to me being one of the three dancers who would be cast in the leading role in The Little Match Girl. And
Mhm.
so I am there just performing my little heart out, but it was impossible to notice that she would not look at me. I
Hmm.
was invisible to her.
Mhm.
And I left the audition, went into the dressing room, and all my little friends are going, "What is up with Miss Marmine? She wouldn't even look at you." And I had that crunch inside of me where that voice is saying something is horribly wrong. And sure enough, going back the next week, the cast list was up. Not only was I not the little match girl, I was placed in the court of ballet with the young dancers. And I had no idea what could have happened. And Robin and those listening, I blamed myself being that
Mhm.
13, 14 years old. And on top of it, I blamed that little voice. I
Mhm.
said, it's that little voice
Mhm.
that caused me to go astray. And so it taught me to distrust that instinct, that
Mhm.
voice. And only when I was in my 50s and I shared the pain that I had felt from that with my mother, did she get this weird look on her face
Mhm.
and say, "Well, Meredith, we were in the middle of a divorce at that time, and I think your
Mhm.
father simply hadn't paid the bill, and Miss Marmine got tired of it." So it had nothing to do with me at all.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
my question
Mhm.
to you is, I know there are other little crushed ballet dancers out there,
Mhm.
little other more of us who not only never developed, never had that nurturing of the instinct, but had something that made us start to distrust that voice. And it did become our own worst enemy, and we would
Mhm.
run from it. What do you say to someone, and this may lead to one of the stories, but one of the things that someone who feels like they need to go back and rekindle a relationship
Mhm.
with that voice within themselves,
Mhm.
how would you suggest that someone starts that?
Right. Well, this is an excellent question. So I'm going to say a couple of things about it. First of all, we were taught and we are taught in this Western society to ignore our still small voice inside, to ignore our inner wisdom. We are not taught in our youth, in our childhood, to trust our intuitive nudges. And when we don't trust those intuitive nudges, we often get hurt. So, Meredith, I've taught over 500,000 people in my seminar career. I have heard story upon story upon story of the times that people regretted not trusting their intuition, and story upon story about the times that people are so glad they did trust their intuition.
Mhm.
And I have never, ever heard a story of someone trusting their intuition and regretting it. So the first thing I want to say to answer your question is that we are not taught in this society to listen to and trust our intuition. And so in our youth, we do have experiences like you had, like I've had, where when we didn't listen to our intuition, we got hurt, and then we shy away from trusting our intuition. The second thing I want to say is that is why I believe intuitive intelligence as a movement in this world has got to happen now. We are living in an artificial intelligence world where you cannot trust the data. You cannot trust the AI. You don't know who put the data in the system. You don't know where the data comes from. So now more than ever, we have got to sharpen our intuitive intelligence muscle. So how do we do that? When we were taught not to, how do we turn that around, Meridith? We've got to turn it around, right? So that is what my dad helped me to do. And that is what slowly over time, every time you trust your intuition and you see a positive outcome, it builds your confidence. So we've got to go from unconscious competence with our intuitive nudges to intentional conscious confidence with our intuitive nudges. And it takes discipline to do that. The more that one does that, the more that they will start to live by and trust their intuition and act on their intuition. I use an acronym in my workshops and in my book called ACT. The letter A means to, when you hear that little nudge, don't ignore it. When you hear that little nudge, anchor it in, acknowledge it in your brain, and anchor it in. And it could be something as simple as send yourself a text message, take a pen and write it on your hand, say it to a friend, whatever you have to do, anchor it in. The letter C then stands for committing to an action for the intuition. And the letter T is to tell people your intuitive intelligence success story. I was leaving a very busy conference that I was speaking at in Denver, Colorado many years ago. And as I was walking across the street, it was very crowded, noisy, busy. I'd just been at this conference. I got to go to the speaker's room and I met Newt Gingrich and other world movers and shakers. And I'm leaving, and it'd been a great event. As I'm crossing the street, I hear this still small voice, very silent, soft voice deep inside. And it said, get on the first plane to Kansas City tomorrow morning. Now, Meridith and everyone listening, that still small voice, it's just a soft internal nudge. It's not loud. It's not audible from the outside in. It's inside of us, that still small intuitive nudge. Having written the book on this, having taught on this, I stepped to the side on the sidewalk and texted myself, airplane tomorrow morning. When I got home, I called Southwest Airline. They said, we just had a cancellation on a flight. It leaves at 6 a.m. and I got on the flight. I'm thinking, people are going to think I'm crazy, but I've learned to trust my intuition. So at dark 100, I've got my driver. He drives me to the airport. Then when I get to the airport, Meridith, that soft voice inside whispers to me, it just whispers to me, check your bag, curbside. Well, Meridith, I used to travel 20 days a month. I don't ever check my bag curbside. The still small voice said, check your bag curbside. So I did. As I'm checking in, the baggage handler says, could you spell your last name? I spell my last name, Graziadei. He puts it in. He says to me, oh, Miss Graziadei, your husband's on this flight. And I say to him, well, I don't think he could be because I'm not married right now. That must be my ex-husband. And he said, is it Michael Edward Graziadei? I said, that's my ex-husband. He said, he is on this flight. I have goosebumps right now telling you the story. This is one of many stories I could tell you, not just mine, but others, of trusting your intuition. Long story short, I run into Mike in the airport. I see him from across the room. My heart is pounding. I'm nervous because I haven't seen him in 20 years, maybe 25 years. I was just in sweats and, a ponytail. I run to the bathroom and put some makeup on, try to look cute. It's a girl thing. Anybody out there
Yes,
listening, that's a girl
yes.
thing. And I walk up to him and I say, Mike, and he looks up at me, he says, you look really familiar. Where do I know you from? And I said, well, Mike, we were married once. And
Oh,
so I didn't
uh-huh.
really recognize him either. And if the baggage claim handler hadn't told me to look out for him, I would have
Yeah.
missed it.
Wow.
So we end up sitting next to one another on the airplane. We unpacked all of our history and the years of, we were together for 18 years. We unpacked all of that. We unpacked our hurt feelings. We shared with each other ways in which we were hurt, ways in which we failed one another, and we asked forgiveness. And,
Mhm.
Mike's crying on the airplane. I'm crying. He gets up to go to the men's room at one point, and the flight attendant comes by and says, are you guys okay? Is everything all right? And I said, that's my ex-husband. I haven't seen him for, I'd have to go back and count it up. Let's just say 20 years.
Yeah.
And she said, oh my gosh. So that's Southwest Airline, the love airline.
Yes, right. Of
Anyway,
course.
we were able to really really truly come to completion with each other. And I had wanted more closure for a long time. And
Yeah.
now we're friends and we have a loving, kind friendship. And we have closure with one another, which makes us both really free for someone else, should God bring someone else along, right?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
now people
Absolutely.
would call that a miracle. I call that your gut instincts, GUT, God's utmost truth. I call it that inner wisdom inside of us that we
Yes.
all have. Every single person on the planet has intuition. We have instincts. A
Right.
porcupine's quills go up when they're in danger. We
Right.
all have that. If I hadn't learned to develop my intuitive intelligence muscle over time, and again,
Right.
Meredith, your question before was excellent because I had to go from not practicing it with conscious competence. I had to go
Yes.
from just being casual about it to being intentional about it.
Yes.
And as I have done that in my personal life, my professional life, the ways in which I serve in the community, it's just I've soared and it's really not me. I'm not any better than anybody else. I just have developed this gift that every person's been given and I
Yes.
act on it.
So that's really important. I want to really, really highlight it because this goes into the territory which Roben, and if you're listening to this, you may know this as well. You may have heard of either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And this really goes into the limitless potential when we take the identity of someone who has a growth mindset. And one of the things that I loved, Roben, when you and I had an earlier conversation, we talked about the concept of grit. We talked about the
Mhm.
word
Yes.
grit. And
Yes.
I shared with you that I also am a big acronym
Mhm.
fan.
Yes.
And Grit Mindset Academy actually stands for
Mhm.
the G, stepping out into the world,
Mhm.
looking at your life through the lens of growth and
Mhm.
growth potential
Mhm.
that are the resilience, which
Mhm.
is proactive, not
Mhm.
after the fact. And
Mhm.
it's another muscle. And
Mhm.
then the
Mhm.
I is that combination of intuition with deliberate intention. And I
Mhm.
have created my own little
Mhm.
word for that, which
Mhm.
is intuition.
Mhm.
And then, of
Right.
course, the T stands for the appreciation that transformation
Mhm.
is as easy as simply making a different choice.
Right.
And so when you learn that this amazing resource that we have, which I call the inner game,
Mhm.
and I believe that when it's in harmony with whether you're calling it God, whether you're calling it source, whether you're calling it God universe, whatever
Mhm.
it is, it's that essence
Mhm.
that does filter to us and allows us, it's almost like taking this beautiful, let's say, I'm going to just use a toaster. Let's
Mhm.
pretend that the
Mhm.
toaster is the most beautiful thing in the world. But if you don't plug it into the wall, you're still not
Right.
going to have toast.
Mhm.
So we are at our most epic, our most empowered,
Mhm.
purpose-driven, innovative,
Mhm.
collaborative, when we are the toaster that is plugged
Mhm.
into the wall.
Mhm.
And to me,
Mhm.
this reminding people that
Mhm.
it's not a gift that
Mhm.
is doled out to some people selectively.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
definitely not, you're either worthy of this
Mhm.
great intuition
Mhm.
or you're not. It really is almost like a force field that
Mhm.
when you open, first to your point, you have to acknowledge that it is there for you to cultivate
Mhm.
and commit to getting started.
Yes. Albert Einstein said that our intuition is our highest form of intelligence.
Yes.
So it's amazing to me that a genius credited in the highest form of intelligence to the letter I in grit, intuition. That
Yes.
is amazing to me. And Steve Jobs talked quite a bit about how he really listened to his intuition to make
Yes.
some of his most important business decisions. Steve
Yeah.
Jobs said, trust your heart and your intuition because it already knows what you need. So when I worked for Franklin Covey, we sold a program. They still sell the program. It's called The Four Disciplines of Execution.
Mhm.
And in that book, they talk about Steve Jobs would get, you know, 1,000 ideas a year from his
Yes.
creative team to develop a product. And
Yes.
he would narrow that down to one or two products to decide between. And he would give credit to his intuition, helping him
Mhm.
make the final decision about which of the two products out of 1,000 that
Yes.
his team would develop, his R&D team would develop. Well, we
Yes.
all know how successful Steve Jobs was,
Yes.
and he gives credit to trusting your intuition. It isn't just in your personal life that you can be
Right.
successful, it's your
Right.
business life also. I will never forget when I was working for Franklin Covey, I was in the field with my boss. I'd only been there a week. And I
Yes.
said, I'm going to pull over to a parking lot and give him a call because I just had this intuitive nudge to call him. I did that. I called him on his cell phone. I happened to have his mobile number. He answered and I got an appointment with him. We then ended up partnering on a program for all of their healthcare students to get
Mm.
a 7 Habits certification along with a health degree so that when they graduate, they have a leg up, that they have a degree and training and soft skills. That partnership increased their retention, increased their revenues, increased their job placement, which they tracked 3 years later,
Mhm.
and the students that were placed were still in those jobs. Those are tangible, realistic outcomes. I've got a personal story that I
Yep.
shared as an outcome and a business story. And
So,
that's why I teach leadership and
yes.
salespeople. Trust your intuition. If you want to soar and you
Yeah.
want to really up your game, if you want to have, I love your acronym, if you want to have an epic life,
Yeah.
start trusting and acting on your intuition.
I love it. I love it. So I want to share with you a question that I get a lot, and I know we're going to love your response. So I can tell this already, Robin. So one thing that I hear a lot when I'm kind of nudging people to start exploring this, I believe that we have that epic, there are basically three epic brilliances that it's our focus, our language, and our ability to envision. In other words, our imagination, which is very aligned with that intuition.
Mhm,
It's
mhm,
nurturing that muscle.
mhm,
And so when I start talking about intuition, one question that I almost always get is, how can I tell if that's really my intuition, or in some cases, if that's my fear speaking? How
Mhm,
do I know that this is really
mhm,
my little voice?
mhm.
How
This
would you
is an
respond to that?
excellent question. Thank you, Meredith. I'm going to say a couple of things about that. Number one, I want to make this caveat. Our intuition will never, ever lead us to harm ourselves or another. It will lead us to protect ourselves potentially, but not to harm. So I say to all of my audiences, people I coach, don't ever say that your intuition led you to harm somebody. No, and it won't lead you to harm yourself either. Secondly, I want to say that how do you know it's your intuition versus fear? Is your intuition is that first nudge you hear. Then our brains kick into gear to start analyzing it and figuring it out and talk ourselves out of it. And that's when the fear comes in. If somebody will really slow down and notice, pay attention to that intuitive nudge, it doesn't really come with any emotion. It's just an intuitive nudge. It's just wisdom, right? There's no emotion with it. But our brains, because we live in an analytical society, our brains kick into gear and start trying to figure it out. And so I
Mm,
say to
yeah.
people, start keeping an intuitive nudge journal. Write it down. And then when you see the outcome, write the outcome down. Go back and read that journal. Share your stories. That's why the T in the ACT acronym, tell your story, that's paying it forward. It builds your confidence to tell the story. And so more and more over time, Meredith, we stop analyzing our intuition, which is then when the feelings come in. It
Mhm.
could be fear, it could be excitement, it could be anything, but your intuition is not an emotion. It's just pure wisdom.
Okay, so this is so good and so sweet. And I don't know if you realized it, but you have created a loop back to kind of where you started with your father and the power of reinforcing.
Mhm.
And so that brings to mind immediately children, when
Uh-huh.
we are young,
Mhm.
when we are impressionable, and changing that pattern of programming us away from
Mhm.
intuition and instead teaching us how to bounce back from the time
Yes.
that we are children.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
happen to know that this is one of your passions.
Mhm.
Share a little bit about that with us,
Okay.
if you will.
Thank you for asking. So I serve on a board of an organization here in Kansas City called Building Bridges. And one of the things we do in the community is we teach a program called Building Bounce. Building Bounce is we are partnering now with the Kansas City school system, and we're serving the underserved population of children. So these are children that come from very difficult circumstances, okay? And we're teaching them how to build grit, how to build resilience.
Yes.
And I like to weave in there how to trust their intuition. And I think when we start teaching that at a young age, it helps us as children to get to receive a different external message. The external message is your internal wisdom, that still small voice, is powerful. Society tries to, especially children coming from an underserved population that may be being exploited in some way,
Yes.
are taught the exact opposite. Don't trust your intuition, right?
Yes, right.
So at our Building Bounce program, we work with children to teach them about how to be creative, how to be
Mm.
innovative, how to actually even use physical motion and movement to heal themselves from trauma and to become the hero of their own story. So to turn that around, to turn their life around, we have to replace the negative things they've been taught with the positive things they've been taught. Hiram Smith was one of my mentors. He's the founder of the Franklin Quest company, which became Franklin Covey. And Hiram Smith used to quote, and I don't know who initially said it, it takes 21 days to build a habit.
Yeah.
So we work with children and we teach them that it's going to take you at least 21 days to start this new habit, this new way of thinking, which is you can be the hero of your own story with resilience, with trusting your intuition, with innovation, collaboration, being creative, through art, through physical movement. Now, I want to share with you, Meridith, that when I was 15 years old growing up in Kansas City, I have always had a heart for children and underserved population. And so I went to church and I said to my pastor, I want a church bus to go down and pick the kids up in Northeast, the underserved population. We had buses that went to all the nice neighborhoods, but I said, I want a bus that'll go to the neighborhoods where children really need a meal on Sundays and a shower and people to love on them. You know, we went down and picked those kids up, and way back then, my heart was for serving underserved children. Now it gets to come, like you said, full circle with what my dad taught me. I get to come full circle as an adult woman and work with children now through the school system, helping them build resilience, innovation, collaboration, intuition, and become the hero of their own story. So we're turning it around. Does that answer your question?
Love that. I know. I love that. I love that. I love that,
Yeah.
So much, Robin. And what's interesting is we were also talking a little bit about how, in addition to people out there and the words that we either say or in some cases don't say that can make a big impact in someone's life, we also have an inner child that is worthy of some of this knowing. And what I kind of hear between the lines that you're creating for these children is a new sense of knowing, a new sense of expectation that pushes back against the hopelessness, the evidence that reality is, life is always unfair, all these things that we hear that can prove to us all of these millions of reasons why we have zero control over our life and we should just give up, throw up our hands, give up. And so the opportunity to, even if it at first is the reluctant hero or shero in our story, to be able to view these boulders, going back to the boulders, as not the in spite of. I never succeed in spite of my boulders. It is thanks to these boulders that I have the opportunity to discover what a superhero I'm capable of being in my own story. And that's the only story that really matters. That's the story that at the end of the day, you'll be looking back at and assessing, did I really fully live? Well, what is my story? And so I acknowledge you for the impact that you have had, not only on the leaders to help them really, because that floods beautifully over into creating harmony in the other aspects of their lives. And then also with these children.
Well, Meridith, thank you for saying all that. One thing I want to add to that, you said it, but I want to build on it, is our inner child. We all have that inner child. So through our Building Bounce program, we're working with children, but through my career working with leaders and salespeople, I'm working with adults.
Yes.
But I'm working with the inner child that's inside the adult, right?
Yes.
That inner child that was never given permission to face a trauma or whatever they needed to face, never given permission to truly have their own voice, never given permission to make decisions that empower them.
Right.
So a lot of the work I do as a leadership and sales coach is I don't say it in those words necessarily, but
Right.
it's really helping to pull up and out of that leader or that salesperson. What is it that's blocking you? What's the
Right.
boulder that you need to
Yes.
overcome that's blocking you from excelling as a leader,
Yes.
excelling as a salesperson? Now, I used to work with Tom Peters. I was a principal in business with Tom Peters, who's the author of the book In Search of Excellence.
Hmm.
We had a consulting practice in Silicon Valley, and we worked with a lot of corporations that are big names now. Back then, they were startups. And one of the things that Tom used to always say is that leadership is everybody's business. We are all leaders. You don't need a leadership title to be a leader. Every single person we have inside of us, the
Yeah.
ability to lead ourselves well, and then lead others well. So a lot of the work that I do as a leadership and sales coach is helping people lead themselves well first so that you can get out of the way when you're
Yes.
leading others. And one of the pieces that's missing, in my opinion, this is just my
Yes.
opinion, but in the leadership coaching and the leadership development world, is teaching leaders to honor their intuition.
Yes.
In
Hmm.
fact, that's how instinctology came about. I used to ask my clients, executives I worked with, I'd ask, what's the one thing you wish you had done differently? And a theme came up amongst big leaders. I mean,
Yes.
famous names now, back then, startup companies, but was, oh my gosh, if I only would have trusted my intuition on this decision or
Yes.
that decision. So I realized there was something missing in leadership coaching, which was nobody is taking the time to help leaders go back to their inner child
Right.
and all of the boulder that happened and the things that are blocking them. And how do you get past that? Well, how about let's try an innovative approach to critical thinking? How about let's look at our intuition? What does your
Yeah.
intuition say in this
Yes.
situation? Not just what does data say? What are your
Right.
executive team pressuring you to do? What does your intuition say? And I have leaders that share that with me, and then they make completely different leadership decisions that have sometimes catapulted their sales year over year, increased retention of employees year over year, come back and sharing with me in private, their marriages have gotten better, their relationships
Yes.
with their children have gotten better. I really think that's one of the missing pieces for leadership in the world today is let's just slow down. Let's
Yes.
nurture our inner child. Let's
Yes.
listen to our intuitive voice and let's start incorporating that profound wisdom into the ways we lead and the decisions that we make. Now, I got on my soapbox there because I really believe in this stuff, but I believe in it because I've seen the
Yes.
difference it's made in the lives of my clients, and I'm walking out in my own life the difference it's made in my life.
Yes.
By all intensive purposes, Meredith, if people know some of the things I went through as a child, which I won't share here because some of them are very, very ugly experiences, by
Right.
all intensive purposes, I should not be a successful, happy, well-adjusted person.
Yes.
But it
Well,
is because of learning to listen to that inner voice. And I'm always grateful that my dad nurtured that in me. So I
yes.
pay it forward to nurture it in others.
I love it. I love it. And again, I think it is so motivating and inspiring to any of you who are listening this. It's yes, there are a million reasons. Make them your superpowers, right?
Mhm,
And your story made me think of two things.
mhm.
One, that I love how you say get out of your own way. If you are a subscriber to this podcast, you will have heard me say that even the word Bolger itself has a clue here because when you take the you out, in other words, when you get out of your own way, then and only then can you have access to that bigger, bolder version
I
of
love
yourself?
that. I
So
love it.
right there is a clue. And then the other thing it made me think of when we talk about the inner child and the trauma that perhaps we went through, yeah, I have a very similar experience with my clients is that there's almost always
Mhm,
something
mhm,
in their past that not only has wounded them
mhm,
emotionally, spiritually, somehow, their confidence, to
mhm,
your point. But on top of that, there's an embedded layer of shame, feeling
mhm.
that I made a bad
Yes.
choice. I should have been able to do something different. Was
Mhm,
I the cause of this? If my parents were,
mhm,
all that were toxic, that kind of thing, and abusive. And it always takes me one of the very first things when I'm sharing some of the basics of how to play the inner game to win is that baby elephant story.
mhm,
And that is,
mhm,
if you are familiar, if you've heard this
mhm,
as a listener, remember that that in parts of the world, elephants are practically construction vehicles. There is like nothing
mhm,
pretty much that they can't push down, knock over, drag. They are tremendously powerful. So you can
mhm,
imagine that when you are a mere human being and you're traveling from place to
mhm,
place, or you're returning these elephants back to their quote unquote pen, you're
mhm,
not exactly going to sit down and have a cup of tea with them and have a conversation. Hey, would you mind kind of hanging out? I'll give you a little more hay tomorrow if you'll stay here. So the problem becomes, how do we keep this huge, amazing beast contained? Well, the way human beings discover they could do that is when they're young, they fit them with a little collar that goes around their neck, and the collar is attached to a chain, and the chain is attached to a magic stake in the ground. And
mhm,
it goes down deep enough
mhm,
so that when the baby elephant pulls against it, not only can they not free themselves, but it's actually painful.
mhm,
So, what is the brilliant assessment at that time for the baby elephant? And
mhm,
it really is a brilliant assessment if you look at what's possible and what's not possible in that moment. And it makes a very smart decision. And that is, I'm going to stop pulling on this thing. That
mhm,
way I get fed, I
mhm,
get taken care of, and it doesn't hurt. The
mhm,
problem, the flaw in that assessment is that instead of viewing it as a moment or a phase, they view it as a trend. They
mhm,
view that it will always be that way. So therefore, you can see these humongous, full-grown elephants that are fitted with a collar
mhm,
and attached to this tiny little stake in the ground. But to them, they never go back and they revisit the possibility that they're not the baby elephant that they were.
mhm,
And they also don't thank the baby elephant
mhm,
for having made a brilliant decision at the time
mhm,
and realize that now's the time to revisit that and make new decisions and make use of the new tools, such as
mhm,
the instinct training
mhm,
that you now we have all these wonderful things at our fingertips. And the trick also that I want to highlight here is not to just listen to what we're talking about. It's it's to actually implement them, like you
mhm,
said, Robin. Go and start creating your instinct
mhm,
journal and then call it out
mhm,
when you recognize it, to the point where emotionally it's registering. This is not a grocery list of, here are 5 times I had my instinct. I saw 11:11 on the clock today. It's not it's not a grocery list.
mhm,
It's a positive trigger
mhm,
that the more that you recognize it, the more the expectation,
mhm,
the knowing
mhm,
is kindled. So, Robin, kudos for all the work that and all the love and generosity and the discovery and the way that it truly is not in
mhm,
spite of the bad things that you experienced as a child. It is thanks to the choices, the
mhm,
opportunities, the listening,
mhm,
that what you made that mean, what you focused on, and therefore what you made that mean for
mhm,
yourself, and by connecting with God, universe, whatever we
Mhm.
call it, and now paying it forward. I love that.
And I love your analogy of the elephant. I don't like to go to the circus because I don't like to see the elephant that's stuck to a chain, and that's
Right.
always troubled me.
Yep.
That noose around the elephant's neck with that stake in the ground, metaphorically, if
Yes.
you don't mind, I'm going to use that as a metaphor,
Oh,
Meredith.
yeah.
Metaphorically, that's what our training was growing up.
Yes,
The ways in
exactly.
which people with not good intentions, perhaps, maybe a little feckless or nefarious, but or maybe they were well intended, whatever the case may be, really taught us not to listen to our
Yes.
intuition,
Yes.
because the noose around the neck was the way to control us.
Yes.
It's metaphorically speaking. So now I say to people, listen to the still small voice inside of you.
Yes.
There's someone else who said it far better than me, and that was Viktor Frankl, who
Mm-hmm.
wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm-hmm.
He was in a Holocaust camp,
Mm-hmm.
and everything was taken away from him. Everything. And he said, the only thing that can't be taken away from me is my right to choose how I respond.
Yes. Yes.
That's leading an epic moment. All those epic moments build up to an epic life. So what
Yes.
I say to people is, you get to choose how you respond. I say this to children that I work with.
Yes.
We
Absolutely.
all get to choose how we respond. That's habit 1 from the 7 habits of
Yes.
highly effective people. Be proactive. We all get to choose how we respond. So how about we start pausing,
Mm-hmm.
listening to our intuition, and respond out of that versus out of emotion, out of anger, out of fear. We're
Mm-hmm.
being bullied. Let's powerfully, let's not just choose our emotional response. Let's take it one layer back, Meredith, one layer back, and let's choose to just pause and listen to that intuitive nudge. And that is what I like to help people do. And I can say honestly that my clients, as they learn to do this, they have what people look on as and say miraculous outcomes, but it's really not miraculous. It's just
Right.
a better outcome from listening to your internal wisdom. And I know in my own life I've had that. And so people ask, gosh, why are you so successful? How have you been so successful? And I say, well, I truly can't take credit for it. I am grateful that I had a dad who taught me to listen to my intuitive nudges. I also give credit to God for leading and guiding me. But we all have that ability. We all have the ability to make the same choice. And so I will say another acronym that is in my book and that I share with my executive clients is ROI. Instead of return on investment, start tracking the return on your intuition.
Yeah.
Start tracking that and seeing what kind of outcomes come from that. I will be starting up an Instinctology podcast in 2025, and I will be inviting people like yourself, Meredith, and others to come and tell their intuitive success story so that
Yes.
we can start a movement of people turning their lives around. I love how
Yes.
you said the hero or the shero of their story,
Yes.
telling their own intuitive intelligence, intuitive success story that turns their life and their circumstances around one by one, moment by moment, person by
Yes.
person. And that's my passion in my heart, is to help people move from the hurt and the brokenness that's inside. And honestly, Meredith, if anyone says they don't have it, then they're just not in touch with it. They're not
Yes.
lying. They just don't know.
Yes.
Maybe the
So,
pain is too big to know.
yes. So, once again, you have set us up beautifully for the 3 questions that I love to ask every single one of my guests. And the first one is, Robin, I want you to imagine that now we're perhaps 100 years in the future, generations ahead, our grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren's, very far in the future. And for whatever reason, humanity has lost access to many of the books with wisdom of how to choose to live. And you have the opportunity in a fleeting moment to share just three gems, three starting points that someone might consider when they're pondering the question of how to choose to live so that I can look back on my life feeling that I have truly lived.
Mhm.
What might those three things be?
Well, I'm going to say one thing, and I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. So I'm
Mhm.
not preaching or evangelizing. I'm just answering what's authentically true for me.
Yes, yes.
And number one for me, it is drawing closer to God.
Mm-hmm.
Number two for me, it is drawing closer to my own internal wisdom
Yes,
and really choosing to honor that over all of the negative feelings and shame I have deep down inside about myself because of something bad that happened to me a long time ago.
yes.
And then number three is pay it forward because you reap what you sow. So, Meredith, every person you help through your podcast, every person I help through my work, every person, the barbershop owner or the restaurant owner or the librarian or the school teacher helps to pay it forward. Now we're making a difference in the world. And I think it comes back to you. So I just say for me, part of it is trusting God, trusting my intuition, and then paying it forward and making a difference.
Wonderful. And so my next question is, I believe that we have one goal and one goal only. And that goal is to be taking our last breath, whenever that might be, thinking, oh my gosh, this was freaking epic. I hope I get the chance to do this again sometime.
Mm-hmm.
In your life, what would what is one thing that you could look back upon having experienced, having accomplished, that would help you from right now where you stand being able to say mission accomplished?
That is a very beautiful question. And
Mm,
what's bubbling up in my heart right now is learning how to truly love another person. And
mm,
that means loving them unconditionally, loving them with all of their perfections. And I guess it has to start with ourselves first, right? If I don't have that love in me, I can't give it. Even loving and forgiving our enemies. So things that have happened to me, I would say the greatest transformational experience for me has been really learning to forgive the people that have harmed me, especially when it was intentional, and
mhm,
being able to love those people. And the other would be the gift of helping to be a second mom
mm,
to my godson. His name is Dominic, and learning how to love him unconditionally, which if you've had
mhm,
teenagers, you know what that means. And
mhm.
so I think the answer is really truly learning how to give and receive unconditional love. And I don't want to say even to or in spite of, but also to the very people who have harmed us.
That's so beautiful, Robin. And then the final question before we share how people can find out more about the organization there where that's helping the kids and how to connect with you on social media is, if you knew that some point within the next 2 years that big boulder was going to drop, what is one thing that you would still want to do to make sure that at least you got it started before that big boulder falls?
Mhm. It's teaching people how to truly love.
Mm.
And I mean, really, that's what's transformed me. I used to be full of so much anger and hate and unforgiveness because of bad things that happened to me as a kid.
Yeah.
There's just no other way to say it, right? And
Yeah.
so learning how to love I think it would be if we could all learn how to love better, the world would
Mm.
be a different place. I think it
Mm.
all starts with love. Everything starts with the
Yes.
heart. When I have had in my career as a speaker, many people come up to me and say, I want to do what you do, Robin. I want to be a public speaker. I want to be on stage. And I would say to them, the number one thing to being successful in this field is you have got to have your heart right.
Yes.
You've got to come from love. You've got to do this out of giving. That's what when I first watched your podcast, Meredith, I thought
Mm.
I have met my kindred spirit
Ah,
because I watched like a number of your podcasts before we met. And I saw that this is a woman that's doing this work because she wants to give, not
yeah.
because she wants to get. And I've seen so, especially today with social media, everybody wants to be a star. Everybody wants to be an influencer. Well, the motivation has to be to give, not to get.
Yes.
So the
Yeah.
one thing, and the answer to your question, is to really learn how to love and to be a giver, not a taker, be a giver. Even if
Yes.
you think it's going to cost you something, how the world will change for a better place is to love and to do what we do because we want to give and make a positive difference, not because we're trying to get something. Does that
Yes.
make
Oh,
sense?
absolutely. And it's remarkable that you would say that because of course it brings to mind something that I hadn't thought about for a long time. And when I was in my probably maybe not even 20 years old,
Mhm,
and I had now moved away from ballet. I had gone to a boarding school, a prep school, the top one in the country, and gone on to Georgetown. And yet, the one thing that I felt was not being answered was the most important question of them all. The name of this podcast, How to Choose to Live,
mhm,
so that we can look back on and feel like we've not only lived, but we've been truly alive, right?
mhm,
And there was a woman who at that point seemed very old to me. I think she was in her 80s, but she had all these beautiful wrinkles all over her face, and she had survived the Holocaust, and she was this remarkable professor at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York, and she
mhm,
knew 9 languages. I mean, and she just radiated this love and this joy. And so I asked her, I
mhm,
said, I want to be like you. And of
mhm,
course, in my crass teenage way, I'm sure I said, I love all the wrinkles on your face and all that. I'm not sure you really want to hear that when you're 80 years old, but I said, I just love everything about you. What's the secret of being happy and being successful? And Robin, exactly what she said is you have to know how to love and you have to be committed to serving. How
mhm,
many people can you serve?
mhm,
And I remember being so fascinated by that statement because it was, to your point, it seemed counterintuitive
mhm,
to a lot of the subliminal messages that we
mhm,
get. I mean, you're going to school, learning all these great skills,
mhm,
yes, so that you can contribute to society,
mhm,
but really measured by what sort of title do you achieve? How
mhm,
much money
mhm,
do you make? All of these
mhm.
things that's very me oriented and not even in a coming alive sort of way.
Right.
So I love that, Robin. That's just amazing. And as you're listening to this, if you take nothing else away from all the gems here today, just pause, like Robin said, and really think about that. Think about that spiritual generosity. as
Mhm.
well as being generous with your time, with your money, with whatever resources you have. So, Robin, gosh, I could go on and on with you. It's wonderful to speak with you. So, for those of you who are listening, where can we get more of you? How can we find you on social media? How
Mhm.
can people get your amazing book? And of course, how can people find out more about this organization, how they can help? And they volunteer? Tell us more.
Okay, thank you for asking. You can find my book on Amazon, and you can contact me through LinkedIn to learn more about my leadership and sales coaching, intuitive life coaching as well, and also about the program in Kansas City where we're helping underserved kids build grit
Mhm.
at the Building Bounce program, and really do all of the things that Meredith and I've been talking about here today. Just go to LinkedIn and search my name, Roben Graziadei. Oh,
Love
and
it.
I'm sorry, my website. What am I thinking?
Oh, yes. Oh,
That's
that.
crazy.
And by
My
the way, we are
website,
going to put all of this in the show notes. So
instinctology.com is my website. So
beautiful.
I can't believe I forgot that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Don't worry. I have you covered. It will, like I said, it will all be in the show notes. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. And I say this all the time. I know you know someone else as you're watching this who will benefit from some of the things Robin and I have shared today. Please go ahead and share it. Talk about serving and sharing the love. Share this love with someone that you know, and share your comments. We would love to hear your comments, your questions, your ideas, your input, and of course, subscribe. That's how we grow this podcast and get more information out there of really how to choose to live in a way that makes you feel truly alive. So, Robin, thank you so much for being a delicious guest today on this podcast. And I look forward to the next time that we have a conversation together.
Thank you for having me on, Meredith. You are such a bright light. You're just so beautiful, such a
Oh,
bright light. And it's just an honor to be on your podcast today. And am inviting you now to be a guest on my podcast when I launch it in 2025.
yay! Well, consider that a full-blown yes, 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 yes. So mark that on your calendars as you're listening this. And what do I always say? Stick around for the bonus tip after this, where we're going to implement actually some of the gems here. And in the meantime, go out and be your own special, brilliant version of epic. Wow, trying to pick one bonus tip, one action step was, I confess, really a tall task. So here's what I'm going to suggest. If you want to take a little 1% action today as a result of some of the gems you heard from Robin, I'm going to encourage you to focus it on simply the pause. When you hear something, when you feel yourself, when you become aware that you're tightening up, something that tells you you're about to get stressed or you're about to react, take a moment to pause and to then choose, how do I choose to respond? And think of the big picture. What is the ultimate finish line? What's the target? What's your objective? What do you really want to achieve? And therefore, what kind of response do you want to choose? I remember when I was little, one of the sayings that really resonated with me was, in some cases, you have to choose whether you want to be right or whether you want to be happy. And the tricky part is knowing which situation is which. So take a pause. Make today a day of pauses. And then, if you're a little more ambitious, I'm going to suggest number two, that you create your intuition journal. Get started on it. And remember, a critical piece is not simply writing down the moments where your intuition came through, but it's really taking a moment to appreciate that, to really soak it in. Remember, we said this is not a grocery list. Your journals, when you're journaling gratitude or specific moments, the point is not simply to write it down. It's to trigger the emotion that then conveys meaning to your subconscious, not just your conscious mind. So as you start to feel that exhilaration from your intuition kicking in, then your programming code starts to acknowledge, ooh, Meridith comes even more alive when she has a great moment of intuition, and it becomes an expectation. And then from there, it elevates to where it becomes this type of knowing. And that's where sometimes you hear that people say that I have a faith in this. So your mission today in that quest for unleashing the most epic version of yourself, empowered, purpose-driven, innovative, and collaborative, is to add that intuition piece. What can you do today to help you pause and respond versus react, and to start nurturing and building your intuition muscle? That's it for today. I'm Meridith Alexander, CEO of Grit Mindset Academy. Yes, please like, please share, please comment, and definitely come back for my next amazing guest on the How to Choose to Live podcast. And so it's time to say, now go out there and do something frickin' epic. Booyah!